It's finally time for another Funky Marketing Show episode, and today it's going to be a great one. I have a pleasure to welcome a guy who I consider a friend, somebody that's one of my favorite people I met on LinkedIn, on Twitter, now on both platforms. And I won't present him. I'll just add him to the episode, to the screen, and maybe he can tell us what's going on. Guys, join me in welcoming Trent Anderson to the show.
Hey, Nemanja, great to be back with you again and part of the Funky Marketing Show. Since last time we talked, I think we were mostly talking about story update on my life. I, as of January 3rd this year, I am now at Podchaser, and we can talk about all the cool things Podchaser is doing and zoom out 30,000 feet or more, talk about what podcasting is and how everything is changing and how it's, I think, representative of a paradigm shift in the way people communicate. So I'm super glad to be here. And I definitely want to make sure that we touch base on how your three ball's coming. I see the videos you're posting online, and it looks like you got your stroke down, you got your stroke back. So you gotta hear how that's going too.
Yeah. I just got a real EuroLeague basketball. Actually, the ball for my Valentine's Day from my wife. So I'm kind of gathering all the elements that I need.
There you go.
Yeah, man. So basically, you are in the center of what I would say it's the fundamental shift of how we actually consume the content, how we create relationship with potential clients, and in a way how we enter the new markets. Because I'm not even gonna mention creating content and that kind of stuff, but it's sort of like a nice transition from like what you have been working before and now into the podcasting, things like going from one level to another.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was the logical leap for me, right? So I had been doing a lot of work in how to create podcasts, how to build structure around podcasts, and really using story to do that, because story, as we know by now, is super effective in terms of creating resonance with audience and the dramatic structure and all that good stuff. So to carry that forward now with Podchaser, I think structure still exists with what we're doing and trying to build a taxonomy for podcasts, right? So when you think about the great tech companies in the world right now, over the last 20 years, let's say, what did Google do? Google gave us a way of creating taxonomy or hierarchy for the way information is sorted and organized, categorized. And what was the point of that? To make discovery easier. Then you think about YouTube, right? So how did YouTube really start to make its mark? Well, they started organizing video content into channels, into playlists, into tags, that sort of thing. So then when you think about podcasting, like what organizational structure exists in podcasting? Up until a couple of years ago, there wasn't any. It was just hit record on a microphone, upload it to some RSS feed, and then hopefully somehow, some way, get audience to hear your message and that sort of thing. So I'm very excited about some of the things that the Podchaser team has been able to do over the last few years, and how it's taking that very necessary step of discovery and podcasts and evangelizing it across multiple industries. And it's really cool to see a lot of the bleed over into B2B, into B2C, into influencer, into everything. So it's very difficult to, I think, enjoy or get as much utility out of a platform if it's not organized in the right way. And I think that's one of our core missions here, is make discoverability more possible through podcasting.
Sounds good. That was my next question, so you answer it.
Yeah.
Love that. Listen, I just finished the call with another guy that has a great agency.
Yeah.
Actually, working in a great agency. They're doing SEO, PPC, so really nerdy stuff around the strategy, not the operational part.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about, because they are thinking about how they should approach to content creation. And then we came up, of course, with a podcast as a platform and everything. And I think um, a year ago, not even a couple of years ago, usually the main piece of content that I would recommend as a pillar content would be maybe written content, because there are lots of people that it's easier for them. They can outsource them, they can write in-house, whatever they can do. But now, when the advertising costs are going up, when you don't have, it's not easy to find the good writers that can translate the thought leadership inside it, if you're not doing SEO, just the thought leadership. So something that only you are preaching about that can be interpreted in the content. And it's the most easiest way and the most beneficial way is to kind of get people that will build you authority, and then get the potential clients, because like all of them, somehow people still get first sales then marketing. So they always have that list of like from 10, 20 to 100 ideal clients that they want to go after. And what would be the ideal way to kind of approach them, and most cost effective way, is to get them into the conversation. And like podcasts appears to be a platform that is actually allowing the companies to get into those conversations.
I totally agree with that. And I think when you look at podcasting as a marketing tactic, right, or a marketing strategy, I think it's probably the most compounding positive tactic you can actually use. And I wrote a post about this the other day, and some people tried to dissuade me from my opinion. But like, you take one piece of, you take a podcast, right? Say it's 30 minutes, say it's 60 minutes, what have you. If you have 3 or 4 key points that you want to pull out of it, you can pull those points into sound clips. You can pull them into social media posts. You're doing thinking out loud, and thinking out loud is the way that you develop a point of view. And that's another thing I think, while it's easier now than ever to spin up a podcast, I have my $10 Amazon mic, I've got, my headset, I got my MacBook, cool. Like, I'm a podcaster now, right? And I think part of the reason why you see so many people go into podcasting, and the data is incredible as far as most podcasts, I think it's like almost 70% of podcasts don't make it past 3 episodes. Which is staggering, right? And
yeah, I think it's scary fact.
Scary fact. And why is that? Well, it takes pardon my language, a shit ton of work to do, right? And to execute upon it. And I think one of the reasons why people fail to be consistent with podcasting, or brands or influencers, whatever, is they lack a point of view. And this is something that the point of view aspect is something I talk quite a bit about. Like, if you don't have something interesting to say that's backed up by data that's contrary to what common knowledge is, you're not a very, how should I say, you're not a very interesting person, right? And if you're not interesting, you're gonna just fade into the darkness with everybody else that's trying to do the thing. So whether it's being a podcast guest or hosting your own podcast, you have to have a point of view. And that point of view really is developed out of insights that you've derived from experiences that you've had. So I totally agree. Like, podcasting is a compound positive only if you develop a point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree. Before I dive into that, like, one thing we didn't mention is that you can actually create written content out of the podcast episodes. Basically, it's the easier way to get the subject matter expert to get insights from him, from her, and to then actually have a little snippet that will also do good for your SEO, for everything. And I mean, it's just turning around the whole content game. And one thing you mentioned about having a point of view, I think lacking a point of view goes even back that to the work that Andy Ruskin is doing. So not many people are starting from a fundamental change that is happening in the society. They go, I'm just solving the problem. And and when you want to talk about solving a problem, you don't have that many things to talk about. You don't have examples of people solving maybe the same problem, or if you're having a unique problem to solve, then there are not many people that are solving the same problem. And then basically you don't get people to open that much and talk about that, because nobody likes to be the first to talk about their problem.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. And to touch on like the written aspects, I know you brought that up again, and I think it's an important one. And that's what I mean when I talk about like the compound positive of podcasts. Again, it's going to be difficult for 9 out of 10 people to say, hey, write me a 2,000 word article that describes the problem that you're solving, how you solve it, what makes your way different, that sort of thing. That's very difficult to do. But if you speak to them, it's a conversation, right? It's a conversation between two people, and just like you would at the bar or the pub or wherever, but you're doing it in a business context. And that's where, instead of the huge task of writing, you can just talk and then transcribe that into whatever it ends up being. Like I said, SEO driven content, so on a blog post, social media content, LinkedIn updates, Twitter updates, that sort of thing. And I will recommend a couple tools that have been supremely helpful for me. It's Snipped or Sniped. And Kevin, I apologize for not knowing what it actually is, but the way that platform works, it's SNIPD. You can take almost any podcast episode and it chunks it out into topics as well as the conversation. And it actually creates like basically a transcript almost automatically, which is super cool. And
nice.
I love that aspect too, because there will be times, and shout out Refine Labs and all the great work that they're doing, where I'll hear like Chris say something like, most recently, the hero metric. Like, I'm like, oh my God, this hero metric, this makes so much sense. That's high impact revenue outcomes. You Google hero metric, there's nothing that exists, right? Well, I popped in Refine Labs podcast on Sniped or Snipped, and I went to the podcast episode, and there it is, him laying out the four qualities that make up this hero metric. So like right then and there, as far as like discovery and information transfer is concerned, like that's powerful. So in any case, just to wrap a bow around that point, like, yes, you should definitely be using text to support your podcast initiatives. And Andy, I mean, Andy's a master at this, like old world versus new world. Like that's the whole point, like to identify change. That's really all we're trying to do, whether you're selling a SaaS tool or trying to lose weight, gain weight, whatever it is. Like you're trying to invoke some change, and change doesn't happen unless you point out something that's an inconvenient truth. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of strategic narrative and what Andy's doing.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I'm laughing because I'm now working on a strategic narrative for two companies. One is the one that knows exactly what they are doing, knows exactly the old game, the new game, and everything. And I'm just here to help them create the structure. And the other one exists for 29 years. They have no idea. They have just a problem that they are solving. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to actually extract that from the company, from people working over there for 29 years, because there are some of them working 15 plus years. It's hard to extract them because they didn't think that way until you came to kind of ask the questions.
Yeah.
And but I think like every company reaches a level when they actually need to go to that sooner or later.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the one last piece of hope that they need to actually change the game or stop existing. It can get to being that extreme.
Totally. Well, and I think to your point about how do you extract this information out, like in the case of like the company's been around for 29 years, there's an exercise that I found through Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. Matthew Dix is like an 8-time Moth winner. Moth is like a storytelling competition and series, but it's called First, Last, Best, worst. I think it's pinned on my LinkedIn profile if people want to check that out. But it's basically, 4 columns across the top, literally first, last, best, worst. And then depending on who you're talking to, you're going to take a business outcome that you're trying to achieve or a business tactic you're trying to achieve, and then literally describe all of the first, last, best, and worst. And this is really effective. I do this with sales teams all the time. Across the top, first, last, best, worst. Across the left column is first cold call, first product demo, first email sequence, or so product demo, sales call, and whatever. So it's like, instead of them coming to me and saying like, I don't know, I keep messing up these cold calls, I don't know what's going on, whatever, I go, well, tell me about the first cold call you ever made. And they can tell you exactly where they were, what they were doing, what the person's tone was. They can like recite this almost verbatim as if it happened yesterday. Say, okay, cool. So you survived your first one. Tell me about your last one. And they say, okay, well, I talked to Marge Smith at XYZ Corporation, and she might have been interested, but I couldn't get her to commit to a meeting. They're like, okay, cool. So you've done this twice now. Now tell me about your best cold call you ever made. Oh man, my best cold call was with Nemanja, and we were talking about Euroball, and we were talking about Doncic and all these great things. It's like, cool. Now what was the best part of that call, and so on and so forth. And obviously the worst is just to refocus and recenter people. So this first, last, best, worst is something that's been super powerful to really unpack the stories that live within, our hearts and minds. And it just gives us a reason to pull them out. So anyway,
Love that.
cents there.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's great. I think, we'll need to link up the resources, but definitely, if people go back and just listen to, to how you explain it, I think it's pretty obvious how they can extract the information that they need.
Yeah, and if they want to, this is the book. So literally it sits right next to me on my desk. So yeah.
Love it. Gotta get that for my shelf. I don't remember when it was the last time that I bought a business book. I think Influence is the last one, because I wanted to have the extended version.
Yeah.
But because I kind of got into the epic fantasy and all those other stuff to get the inspiration and to kind of like get my mind out of the business books. And it works perfectly. I got back onto the track and everything, and I just finished reading the scar tissue from the Anthony Kiedis.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I was expecting to kind of, get the story. It's the story of him surviving, basically.
Yeah.
But you get what people are dealing with. Like reading the book, I had the wish to punch the guy so many times. Kind of, but and that is exactly one more thing that we can attach podcast to, and Definitely. It is how to not only how to tell the stories and learn how to do it a different way, but also how to do the customer research, the market research, those kind of stuff, because like not many people have the chance to jump on the sales calls.
Yeah.
Or or listen to somebody who is their target audience, whatever it is. But today we have so many people being a guest on different podcasts, talking different stuff, and I think like you just need to find the right podcast with the target group that you are going after.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think it's especially important for people that are maybe earlier in their career, right? So like, I'm going to just bring it back to sales because it's the easiest thing for me to talk about. Let's say you hire a 23-year-old SDR and they've done, maybe a year's worth of volunteer work till they found what they wanted to do. And then you come in and you say, hey, great, you're going to set up meetings. And we have this very complex SaaS software selling into CIOs and CTOs. What does a 23-year-old know about the empathy that it takes to be a CIO or CTO? They don't, right? And that's okay. They can't even really sympathize. All they're doing is really being a hammer looking for a nail. But Kevin Dorsey, KD, as he's known on LinkedIn, I remember listening to one of his podcasts saying like he just ripped through all like guest appearances from VPs of information technology, CIOs, and he started to like just take notes, like what was keeping them up at night. Like that was a question like podcast hosts almost always asked. And you think about how silly it is for an SDR to cold call a CTO and say, "Hey, Mr. CTO, what's keeping you up at night?" And the guy says, "Well, I didn't have enough bourbon, so I couldn't fall asleep." Like that's the level of insight you're going to get. But if you actually do research and you listen to 5 CTO, CIO types in your target verticals, and you start to unpack what it is they are talking about, the things that they're thinking about, not just today, but 2 years into the future. And if you can find an overlap between what your product or solution does and like what they're talking about, like if you create a nice Venn diagram, you should lead with that insight. And that insight leads to a much better phone call, much better cold email than just saying, "Hey, CTOs in your space are using our solution to do X, Y, Z. Interested in having a look?" So using podcasts as a research tool, I think can really separate good from great and great from like top 1% of sellers. And the same thing goes for marketing. And I know there's been so much conversation on LinkedIn and Twitter about voice of customer and customer research. And I think one thing that most people fail to mention is like, you might have all the great intentions to do that, but actually getting customers on the phone is very, very difficult, especially when you need them to commit to 30 or 45 minutes. Let's say you don't have the best questions available for them, and it just leads to like, okay, great, I've got all this information. Now what do I do with it? I think one way to supplement voice of customer or customer research initiatives is to search podcasts for titles that you're looking for in industries that you serve and pull out insights from those podcasts. Like to me, that's a no-brainer. And I think that's something that I'm trying to evangelize Podchaser to do, is like, this is the Zoom info, if you will, of content that exists in podcasts. So yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased with it, but like, I bet I could create like a pretty good personality graph from you, Nemanja, just by listening to your podcast. And it means I think I know you, and we've talked 5 or 6 times, right? So yeah, there's power in that.
That's exactly what I heard. Just for the conversation that I mentioned that I just had, is like the guy said, "Hey, but just by listening to a couple of people on the podcast, I feel like I know that now it's the first time we're seeing each other, but I feel like, and I didn't watch like too many episodes, maybe in a year, 5 hours of your podcast or your video."
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, he even didn't know that I have the video version of the podcast on YouTube. He was just listening to the audio. And he feels like he knows me. And, and what you said about Podchaser becoming, the Zoom info, I just remember we the last episode we published, not recorded, but published with Maya Grossman. She said, if you just want to get the email, the contact, you don't need to do actual marketing. You can just use Zoom info and get the contact. It's kind of the same with the Podchaser. Basically, you can go over there, and this is where your research can happen.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing, I think. Like, no matter what you want to do with these, if you want to supercharge your insights, so you're sending better cold emails, you're doing better positioning and branding, you're using better audience demographics to target on paid social, whatever. Like, all of that data, anecdotally and like hard data, lives within our platform, which, again, like, shout out to the dev team on our side for being so forward thinking with it. But like, that information's at your fingertips. It's up to you how to use it. But I think there's probably enough talking heads on LinkedIn now to say like, hey, here's how you leverage these insights once you have them.
Yeah, and I want to bring in one more thing that I have done. So I've been trying to find a way how I can, because I'm usually an edgy guy. Like, I talk what I mean and what I think, and I usually don't hold back. But I felt like in the last couple of months that I started to hold back for some of the things, and I just wanted to find another another thing to get me back to where I was. And I was thinking, like, who's creating edgy content on LinkedIn? Like, there's one person that is now not on LinkedIn, Mike Winnet.
Yeah.
he's on Twitter, and then there's the other guy. It seems like those UK Manchester guys are actually doing it. So there's Dan Kelsall. There's Leah as well, but those two. And what I did, I found all the episodes where Dan was the guest on the podcast, on different ones, when he's talking about different stuff, about investments, about failure, about how do they approach, because they know the mass market, so they didn't need to know every niche and every industry. So they just get to the point, and how if I'm actually swearing, that's my brand, that's not your brand, so I need to explain that as well, and those kind of stuff. And like, what's funny thing, I started implementing some of those things, and like 2 days after that, LinkedIn removed one of my posts. Like, yeah, man, I'm there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of that goes back to having a point of view, right? Like
Yeah.
if you have something that you think is worth saying, you're going to say it because you believe it, right? And the way you say it, of course, like I think a lot of people got infatuated with the Gary Vee style of, every 5 words is a 4-letter word. But like if you're passionate, like you can see it, you can feel it. Like I could feel that story coming across, literally tens of thousands of miles. Like that's who you are. And that's super powerful, because if you feel like you know someone, you're probably going to trust their opinion more, right? And I think that's true in an organic sense, but also think about to talk about like performance marketers, right? Like you see all the time all these threads on Twitter about how well user generated content performs, as opposed to highly produced, highly published, like tens of $1,000 video shoots, that sort of thing. Like people want to see real people doing the thing that the company's promising. So when I compare that to the podcast industry, right? Like we look at podcast ads, and podcast advertising alone is going to be a $2 billion industry this year in 2022. That's up significantly since last year, and it's projected to double again for 2023. And why is that? I think it's because real conversations are happening in an audio format, and it's much more intimate because it's filling a gap that we have, and that longing, that desire to be connected with people that we care about. So if you feel like you care about the person that's reading the thing, reading the ad, you're much more likely to have a positive connotation of said ad. And the example I always give is Tim Dillon. He's one of my favorite comedians. He says a lot of crazy stuff, which that's what comedians do. But the way that he's able to editorialize or like work ad reads into his bit, like it just feels like it's native, like it's part of the show. And hand up, like, what did my wife get me for Valentine's Day? She got me Magic Spoon cereal because I've been talking about it forever, because I first heard about it on Tim Dillon's podcast. And the way that he talks, he basically has a skit where he talks about all the different ways that he eats Magic Spoon cereal. So there's a lot of power in that, and like that's where I think podcasts are in particular are this compound positive, whether it's from an advertising perspective, from a conversation perspective, and then certainly back-end marketing, so like SEO, social media, that sort of thing. There's a lot of power, because a lot of the most genuine conversations in the world right now are happening in an audio format. And again, just to tie a bow on like where podcasting is and some of the things that have been going on in the industry, like it's a free platform, right? It's free speech. People can voice their opinions. And I think the one thing that's super important to recognize is like the way that you keep free speech is by inviting more free speech to platforms. And I think that's what makes authentic connections happen. So again, like I'm super bullish on the future of podcasting, and I'm super bullish on the relationships that you can build and its utility as a marketing channel. Not just for today, but certainly, within the next decade or so.
Yeah, and based on some things that you said, I mean, if somebody asks me today, where can they go to learn about specific things? So advanced level, not just the basic ones. It's not like I don't have any online course or whatever to give to them. I just give them the link to the specific podcast. Because I think like those things, not many companies are putting into, I don't know, like the written format or whatever it is. It's hard to get to those stuff, and you just need to dive deeper. And when you are one-on-one with somebody, just like we are now, you are able to dive deeper and to get actually the things that you feel, the things that you know, the things that you have experienced, because your focus is just here. And then you go. There are some companies that are writing like the Ross Simmons and the Foundation and all those other similar people and companies that are actually creating the great content, the great bigger pieces of content. But I think like podcast is the one when we can get to to actually get the insights and advanced level knowledge that we cannot find anywhere else. If somebody asks me to go to who can I recommend for the B2B marketing, I will say the State of the Man Jan. I will say Funky Marketing Show. I will say a couple of other podcasts because that's all. Go ahead, listen to those episodes, and that's how you will, find specific knowledge. Also, it's like when I'm onboarding somebody who is working with me with Funky Marketing, basically I have like these around 30 episodes of B2B Weekly that I have recorded with Marty Sanchez, and I basically just send them the link to the Spotify or wherever it is, any platform that they are using. Go ahead, listen to this 30 episode. You can see how I have developed the company, how my opinions were changed, and how we are going, from what we were at the beginning to what we are now. And they are on board, basically. That's all that they need so they can get to the specific level. Also, one thing that we need to mention that we are getting from the podcast that we can do it to create relationship with people and actually get into the new markets. So the thing that I want to talk more about podcast is using them as a way to get into the new markets, because like it's hard. I'm coming from Serbia, from the, let's call it, the third world country, and because we are not officially inside the European Union, and then like looking at the US, so that market, we are on another continent, and going into the industry over there, into the highly competitive industry, and being that detached, it's not easy. So what can I do? Can either use ads as we remembered and maybe get in front of some people, or I can, I can point out who are the people that I want to have a conversation with, even if they are potential customers or they are my peers, or they are somebody that is after the same target group as I am, get them to the podcast and have the real honest conversations with them, get to know them. We have these 50 minutes before we record the show, we have these 50 minutes after we record the show, and basically my ideal customers or my peers are the ones that are creating the content with me and are distributing the content with me, or we can go and say even for me. So they are distributing the content because they are a part of the content, part of the creation. So usually that's how it goes, and it's really really interesting, to come to that. As I say, we need to get to the conversation with the right people, and this is how nobody is ever refusing to get with you on the podcast, because people like talking about themselves, and you can use that fact. You can use that fact, not trying to sell them anything, but if they come to the podcast, which is sponsored or organized by you and your company, where you have, when you talk about your product as well and your service, you think that they wouldn't recommend, the benefits that they will have from using your product. Of course they will have. You think that other people from the company listening to the podcast because somebody who is decision making from their company is on the show, think that some of them wouldn't notice that, hey, they're actually having the tool that we can use. Of course they will know. This is how things are actually unraveling and how things are happening. Interesting, what are all those things that you can actually um, use the podcast for as a platform. Lots of stuff are included. You can use it for whole lot of different things, and and if you are holding back from that just because maybe you're not the great host, maybe you're not the right, you don't have most insights or those kind of stuff. Well, let me give you a couple of things. First of all, if you consider that you are not the right guy or a girl or lady to jump into being the host, hire somebody who can. It's that easy. There are people out there that do this professionally, and they be more than willing and help you do that. Okay. The next thing is, you think you don't have the knowledge, or do you think that I know everything that each one of my guests know? We have more than 40 guests on the Funky Marketing Show. Well, what I do is I go over their LinkedIn and Twitter profiles. I extract the documents. Here is Trent joining me from the
Hey.
mobile phone. Let's try it out.
By mobile phone, yeah. So this will be fun. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's happening. I'm just explaining to people, if they are finding excuses not to jump into the podcast, how do they don't have the right person or the knowledge or anything. So I'm saying, basically just by going through their LinkedIn posts, by going through their Twitter posts, they can see the topics that people are actually excited about, and get into those conversations. Sometimes it's that easy. About us section on LinkedIn is also what else, and then you can do as we tell your research and actually listen to a couple of the podcasts where they were the guests,
Yeah.
and go and talk about those stuff. Like, I want to get your opinion on, because I mentioned that using the podcast to kind of get into the new markets, because this is why the way I've been using Funky Marketing Show, because like coming from Serbia, basically a third world country, we are not part of the EU even, and US, was on another continent, and it's a highly competitive industry. And why would somebody hire me coming from Serbia?
Yeah.
So I need to get into conversation with those people and actually, try to involve them into content creation, content distribution. So then, people from their company will actually listen to them, if not them, because, somebody who is decision making in the company has been on the show. Let's listen to what he has to say. And then if you have a product or the service that is attached to it, of course, they will think about, if we can use that product for us as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll give an example of what I've been doing at Podchaser. So like one of our core customer bases is agencies. So whether it's PR agencies, social agencies, podcast booking agencies, whatever it is. So that's great. Like that represents the bulk of our revenue right now. But in order for us to go from startup to scale up and then even further, we need to figure out what other verticals are useful for this. So you start to look around and say, who's most active in customer acquisition right now and who has a propensity to be on podcasts. And the good thing is, as a consumer of podcasts, I hear all kinds of podcasts ad reads all the time, right? So one that I thought was interesting in particular is sports betting. So here in the States, and now it's different in Europe, but in the States, there's like 13 different governments that have legalized sports betting in the US, right? So as a result, there's a massive land grab going on for players, because if you can get somebody to put in $50 and then you're going to match the deposit bonus, some of the metrics for lifetime value of those customers are incredibly high because they keep coming back and there's some loyalty to your product, right? So FanDuel and DraftKings are two of the largest sports betting companies in the world, or at least in the US. And as a result, they've purchased, most of the premium spots as far as advertisers are concerned. So your top 10 in Apple and Spotify, they're almost always in. So looking around, who are some of the challenger brands in sports betting? The ones that might not be the 800-pound gorillas, but maybe they're the challenger brands. And what I started to do is literally look for interviews from marketers and founders in the sports betting companies in podcast appearances using Podchaser to hear if they were doing any sort of conversation about their customer acquisition strategy. And lo and behold, they view podcast partnerships as one of the greatest things for them. One, because there are still some regulatory issues that prevent them from advertising on Facebook or Google. Okay, so if those two channels are out, now what? And then there's podcasts. So, okay, great. We have some insight that this is a good market for podcasts. But like next thing I needed to do is how do I use their language to actually sell them to them, basically, right? And I noticed in a couple of the interviews that I listened to, they weren't talking about things on a like an impression basis, which is where most of the podcast advertising platforms are purely focused on delivering impressions. Instead, these founders were talking about CPA deals, so like cost per acquisition, in which the podcast host that they're providing support for are getting an actual cut of whatever customer flow comes their way. So it's like, okay, great. There's no additional outlay on cost to the betting company. It's a mutually beneficial partnership. So as a result, spun up a 6-minute Vidyard video, literally using Podchaser to show how you can source podcasting opportunities, podcast advertising and partnership opportunities in emergent shows that have not been touched by the DraftKings and FanDuels of the world. So as a result of doing that and reaching out to 10 different challenger brands in the space, like we booked 4 meetings within a week, which was incredible. So like that is, in my opinion, how you like make all of this full funnel, if you will. So there's information out there. You just have to be able to find it and know where to leverage it.
Yeah, and you know that Podchaser can give you the information and all the things that you need. So tell me one thing. One thing I think we didn't talk about. What do you see that we need to measure when it comes to the podcast? Because that's kind of something that people trying to chase away from the topic, and people have different opinions. I'm not the guy who is like measuring anything to the podcast. Like our mutual friend Marty Sanchez says, like, I don't care how many downloads do we have. I just want to get into the conversation with people. That's it. But at one point, you actually, as a host, start looking at, are people coming back to listen to more episodes? Or, like when you post an episode, how many people are actually going to listen to it or watch it before you even start distributing it? Because that means that you are actually building a momentum or a community or something else.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone gets hung up on podcast attribution because they can't easily get a report out of Salesforce or HubSpot. Like, okay, great. You can't do that for traditional media. You can't do that for billboards. I mean, it's just know the medium, right? And I think there are a couple people that think about this in a really good way. Mark Thomas from Powered by Search, I think he's said that they've got a 15x ROI on their podcast. And someone challenged him in the comments, like, well, how do you know that? It's like, it's very simple. We use self-reported attribution models to say, how did you hear about us? And they type in, I heard you on the podcast. I've been listening to your podcast for 6 months. Chris Walker does the same thing with Refine Labs, and getting to know some of the people at Refine Labs, like whether it's MJ or Daniel, like that's literally what they measure is inbound leads with referral source being a required text-based fill out. And it almost exclusively is heard you on the podcast. My friend sent you a podcast. My friend sent me a podcast episode. So like, if you really want to tie it back to ROI, self-reported attribution, I think is as simple as putting a form on your site with, instead of dropping down and saying PPC, Google, social, referral, whatever, you just literally make it a required field and people have to type in how they heard about you. And that's like by far and away the most effective. But again, like that doesn't show up in out of the box HubSpot or out of the box Salesforce. So part of it is just using a little bit of common sense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And usually people say, we know everything, we measure, we use, UTMs and, but they cannot measure those things.
Right.
I mean, with UTMs, it's something different. When I don't know, like the company you mentioned, we also do have that question in form. Like when somebody said, "I got funked on LinkedIn," or I've been listening to the Funky Marketing podcast, and I like the way you guys approach marketing. It's very similar to what I'm thinking, and I want to see if we can do something together. You cannot have that with the UTMs or finding something else, because
Yeah.
that's where you see it. It's okay if you get it on the discovery call as well, but here you even know what happened before you get to the call.
Yeah.
You even know what worked, and so you can prepare yourself better. And if it's the podcast, then you need to go and all in on those things. Like for Refine Labs, they have specific episodes when they talk about really in-depth stuff. If somebody sends the episode that is talking about, I don't know, like dark funnel, for example, they know that they need to go more on that topic. That's
Yeah.
also another way that you improve the content that you're getting out there.
Yeah, you should be creating a virtuous cycle with all of this, right? And I think that's part of the issue why people stop after 3 podcasts is like they're not actually digging in and understanding what it is that their audience is enjoying or not enjoying about it. So they just randomly pull like a Google search and they say, okay, what's the top ranking keyword for whatever, and then they try to make a podcast about that. But it's not sticking because why? Like the intent is totally different. So yeah, again, creating that virtuous cycle from audience is so important, and I think that's what Chris talks about quite a bit. Like they host Demand Gen Live, every Tuesday or whatever, and they're literally sourcing content ideas from people that are asking real questions in the field. So like that's really big. The one thing I want to talk about real quick is just like the podcast advertising attribution. And again, this is a really hot button
Nice.
topic, especially because some of like your bigger agencies in the world, like the OMDs, the WPPs, whatever, like they are buying media in bulk, right? And they have very different attribution models. Like they want to be able to basically go back to their CFO and say, hey, we advertised on this podcast for 30 days and like we want to know exactly what that straight line was to the investment. And again, I think that's a little bit of, and this isn't just to talk about the agencies that I listed, but anyone, like straight line attribution is interesting. Like it might be a data point, but like what we should really be measuring is like branded search 30 days before and 30 days after a campaign ran too. So like not everyone's going to take like the unique identifier, like go to funkymarketing.net/Nemanja to get 10% off like your first consultation, whatever it is. Like literally look at branded funky marketing search terms 30 days prior to running the ad and 30 days prior or 30 days after the ad. And that's another data point for you that like the branded search terms mean that people maybe aren't taking that direct CTA, but they are doing their diligence to
Yeah.
make sure that it's aligned. And it's like that's so common sensual, but again, because it's not crapped out of a Salesforce report, people don't do it. So it's really not that hard. I don't think, but people have to like break out of their attribution box. Like, hey, if we don't measure this, the CFO is not going to give us budget. You got to look at this whole thing holistically.
Yeah, also a couple of things they can go in, besides branded search, and go for it. I think like if they are having a guest on the podcast, like it's easily visible even if you're just using, Google Search Console and you have the link to the podcast on the website, link to any website. You can see if people are looking for, I don't know, for Trent Anderson, from Nick Bennett, well,
Yeah.
whoever it is, and finding your website in the search, your podcast in the search in that way. And that also means something. Did I get the right guest, that can talk about specific topics? Because if you have the right guest and that guest keep building, her brand around something like ABM or something like that, your podcast will pop up also in the
Yep.
search. Those,
Yep.
those are all things that you cannot just measure at a moment. Those are all things that you need to watch in the long run and actually see how it develops.
Yeah, yeah, it is long run, right? But like, why are you doing what you're doing? It's for long run. Like, if you're into doing anything in the short term, like You might as well be one of those people on LinkedIn that's DMing about Forex and crypto investments and stuff, right? Like this isn't about making a quick buck. This is about like doing things that matter and making good decisions for playing long-term games with long-term people. And again, that's my 2 cents, but yeah, like there's just so much more to marketing than direct response, performance marketing driven things. And you know that, I know that. I think the people that we cross paths with and in a small circle know that too. So I think that's one of our challenges here too, is right. Like what's the purpose of marketing? What's the purpose of content? Like it's to create an experience and you know that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's I don't know, like Jay's gonna kill me because I didn't remember the name of the podcast, but Jay Barron,
Yeah.
and he's always with two more people on a podcast. They are discussing different things, and they are discussing like we just saw that post in the LinkedIn feed. Let's talk about it. Is that actually true or no? And challenging things, and that's also like a point of view up to all those
Yeah.
examples that you mentioned. That's also one of them. Like, is marketing gonna keep being measured on the revenue? Is that real or no? Like, is that conversation gonna last? Uh, Community-led growth, is this something new or it's been here forever, or those kind of things. And if you had a point of view and actually had experience and you're deep into the topic, you can really just take the topic that everybody's talking about and digest it, and see those things will work for you, those things won't work for you. Like,
Yeah.
all the, I don't know, things that we are seeing on LinkedIn, all the content is mostly for tech B2B companies, fast growing tech B2B companies. And if we get outside of that, it won't work for majority of companies. For industrial companies, it won't work. LCV, language service providers, it won't work. So it's easy to get into those things. So that's why it's important to do the research and go and find exactly the right points that you can find the right insights.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And obviously it's good to find data that supports your insights. And like, that's the last thing I'll say about my veiled Podchaser pitch, right? Is especially with podcasts, like, okay, you assume who the target audience is for, let's say like Guy Raz, how I built this, right? You assume it's going to be mostly tech bros that are entrepreneurs based in Silicon Valley. I'll actually post a screenshot when you post this. I'll post a screenshot of Guy Raz's podcast to show like what the actual audience insights look like. And I think you and I will both be surprised to see like it's probably not what we predicted. There's probably a lot more diversity that goes into his audience. So like that's again what we provide is like a social graph basically of everything that goes into the podcast itself, not just like the content. So again, the picture's worth 1,000 words, so I'll post a screenshot for how I built this.
Love it, man. Tell me and all the others where they can find you, except LinkedIn, Twitter. What else?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best. So my CRO Cole and our head of product Dave like to give me a bunch of crap because my LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in/growth Trent. And now in Slack, if you type in growth Trent as an emoji, it's just a stupid picture of my face. So, but that is the LinkedIn profile page, and then Twitter too. So that's Trent Anderson, and the O is a 0 because I'm cool like that. But yeah, lots of good conversation. I'm definitely more active on LinkedIn now. And then podchaser.com just to get all the goods on podcast data.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We talk about lots of different stuff. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's Trent, sometimes it's two of us, depending on the on the Wi-Fi today. But go back to the beginning of the podcast, of the episode, digest everything, and come back to to Trent, to me, to this recording. You will actually find the live stream if you type Funky Marketing Show Trent Anderson. You will find where we actually live stream this, and you will come back and ask the question. So we can continue the conversation, and we can maybe share more insights and give you the specific, you know, specific advice that you need for you, not just what we are talking about here, but maybe something for you. Because I mean, that's what we do, right? That's what
Yeah.
all the people should
That,
do on the social.
that's why I love talking with you, Nemanja, because you really do put others first with all this. Like, you just want to help, and you can't fake that. Like, that's just core to who you are, and it's why I really enjoy talking with you. And I think that's why Funky has grown to how it has. So I try
Yeah,
to
like
emulate it as much as I can.
listen now this. I understood some of the things while I've been developing the company, and I found out that they want to work with more people, and actually I want to reach as many companies as possible. So I decided to not have anybody in house as a team, but all of them have their companies, and all of them are not working only for me but for others. So we are all extending the knowledge, reaching out more companies.
Yeah.
And then I added the fractional CMO role. So basically, through that, those companies, when I'm the fractional CMO, I'm actually reaching out more people that I can on just me. And and I think that's in the core of everything. Like, how can I get myself in the position to help as many people as companies as possible? And I think it's visible when we actually really try to help people instead of just faking it, right?
100%.
Man, thanks for being here. You know, I think the recording will be good, no matter if you had, some things with
Yeah.
Wi-Fi and those kind of stuff. But guys, go ahead, follow Trent, reach out to him. And one thing that we always say for the end: keep it funky.
Keep it funky. Thanks so much, Nemanja. We'll check in on your 3-point shot next time. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Bye bye.